So what an exciting forum to be part of today. I don't think I have presented to such a diverse group of people within one sector that I can recall in the many years that I have been talking about communication and brand strategy. So today we are going to do a very, very power, speed date run through communicating with influence and talking about the power of positioning and how you can be more intentional about shaping your story and what you say, but also being intentional about how you share it. And we're going to talk about things like moments of truth and why they're important. So what do we mean by positioning? Well, whether we like it or not, or are aware of it or not, every person, company, or organisation has an image, and that whether or not that is consciously managed. So if you think about, and we're going to talk about some of the well-known brands in a moment, but it is all about that deliberate perception and how we be more intentional about shaping that. So we talk about a conscious and deliberate effort to influence perceptions, and that might sound a little bit manipulative, but I like to think about it as being strategic and savvy. So the more intentional you are about your story and what you want to say, the more you can shape the perceptions. It's about knowing how you want to be perceived and bringing that to life through every moment of truth. Does anyone want to have a stab at what I might mean by moment of truth? Otherwise, I'm going to job on a Rowlander. What do you think I mean by moments of truth? Anyone? It is all of those touch points or opportunities we have where we interact with a brand. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. So if you think about all the interactions that you might have with an airline, and this is actually where this terminology came from. So the former head of Scandinavian Airlines, a gentleman by the name of Jan Carlson, formulated this phrase back in the 80s. He realised that in the airline industry, there are many, many opportunities to shape perceptions with customers. And if you think about every time you fly, whoever you're flying with, all the moments of truth that you have, the app, when you go to check your bags, when you get on the plane, when you're actually addressed by the flight attendants or the captain, all of those help shape perceptions and your experience. It's adopting the appropriate attitude and style. So if I came in here today wearing gym gear, that might be great from a sports perspective, but you're probably going to doubt my cachet in speaking about brand and communication strategy and communicating with influence. So understanding the context of where you are and matching your content with that. And then it's accepting, as I said, that every moment of truth shapes perceptions. So it is a very speedy take that we're going to do today. But the two things that I want you to keep in mind is how we be intentional. I'm going to talk about that word a lot, intentional. So what you communicate, how you harness that power of positioning, and then how you communicate and how you make the most of those moments of truth. Oops. Sorry, clickers. Okay, so there's three very well-known brands, and they spend a lot of time, energy, and money investing in shaping the perceptions they want you to have about their brands. So McDonald's, instantly, they make a promise of value, consistency, reliability, convenient, fast, happy. Apple, we all know, intuitive design, sophisticated, simple. So you know what to expect with these brands. What about Qantas and Virgin? Where might they sit? So I just might throw out to a few. When I talk about Qantas, what instantly comes to mind? What are some of the words? Premium, yep. Yes? Thank you. Anything else? Australian, exactly. And probably loyalty. Now, I would say the airline industry has had many, perhaps faltered a bit since COVID, but there is a lot of effort. If you pay attention to the advertising, and even when you fly, there is a lot of effort being made at the moment to shift your perceptions around back to some of those attributes. So what about Virgin? When I say Virgin Australia, what comes to mind? Yep. Fun, a little bit irreverent, stylish, fashion. So they're two businesses that do exactly the same thing. They fly from A to B in planes. That's it. But how they position themselves, how intentional they are about shaping those perceptions and what they do to shape those looks very different. So when we talk about the power of positioning, I like to think about it as your lane. And when you know your lane and know what it is that you stand for, you can go forward and communicate with influence and communicate with confidence. And that comes back to knowing your story. So when Corey and Braden came up here this afternoon, they knew what their story was. They articulated that quite succinctly. And they have been very intentional, even as they've developed their businesses, in establishing their story. And one of the ways that you can do that is through key messages. And this afternoon, we're going to give you a chance, as representatives, as the sports tech sector, to think about the messages that we want others to hear when they hear about the Queensland sports sector. So we think about key messages as umbrellas or umbrella themes that are memorable and repeatable. And the value of key messages is that not only are they easy for you to remember, but they're also easy for others to hear and remember. And research has shown that all of us don't really remember more than 3 key messages. So we often encourage organisations and individuals, if you're thinking about your messaging, try and stick to 3. It also means no matter where you are, whether you are a one-person startup or a sports organisation, or you might be a very mature company that is shifting into this sports tech sector, as you grow, it will help you replicate your story. So being consistent and compelling is incredibly important. So when we're working with key messages, as I say, you'll get a chance to have a little bit of input into this process this afternoon when you break out into the workshop. It is important to think about what sets your business apart. So what are the themes that you are going to build your key messages around? As I said, we talk about limiting those to 3. And importantly, you can make a claim. You can say, we're the biggest in the world, we're leading. I heard Corey talk about the fact that Next Level Racing is leading. I'm sure Corey can rattle off some very succinct proof points to support that claim. So if you're in the sports tech sector, for example, and you might say, we are pace setters when it comes to innovation. It's a great message. But you need to have the proof to support that. So whether it's the fact that you have been the first to develop XYZ, you might have an incubation centre, it might be that you continually build on your customer feedback to build up that innovation. So just keep in mind when you are thinking about how you want to shape your story as an organisation, that you actually have the proof points to support those claims. And what we always talk about beginning with the end in mind. I think this is one of the most powerful tools that you can have. So if you think about when you are going to present, like I'm doing today, or you might have to develop a pitch, you might be going for some grant funding, what is it that you want the audience to take away? Oh, I've lost my clicker. You might have to click for me, Reese. Hello, you might have to click for me. Oh, there it is, thank you. So beginning with the end in mind. Stephen Covey, when he talked about the 7 habits of highly effective people, this is one of the key pieces, the key tools that he imparts. So if you think about where do I want to go, what is it that I'm trying to achieve, and importantly, what do I want my audience to think, feel, and do? So if you begin with that end in mind and think about these 3 questions, it becomes easier to work back from those and think about your takeout. So is it that I want people to feel excited, inspired, curious? Obviously we want people to buy our products and transact with our services. But what do I want them to feel? Do I want them to feel or think that I have got the solution to their problem? Am I going to be excited by are they going to be excited by what I have to say? So that's a little bit about shaping your story and that power of positioning. But the real word that I want you to remember is being intentional about that and being strategic. So no matter where you are, what type of organisation you have, where you are in your sports tech journey, if you walk away from today and think about, have we got our story sorted? Do we know what we want to stand for? Have we considered key messages? Have we actually articulated and defined who we are, what we do, and why it's important? Have we, when you go to do your presentations or pitches or put any information together, begin with the end in mind and always ask what you want your audiences to think, feel, and do. So that's a bit of a power play on positioning. That's how you shape your story. But what about sharing it? How do you make an impression in sharing what you do when you communicate? We're going to spend a bit of time on those all-important moments of truth. So it's important that we make an emotional connection. Good brands do that. So when you are, I guarantee most of you have already decided whether you are an Apple fan or whether you're Android. And those, whether it's Samsung or Apple, they work very hard to make an emotional connection. So it's not just a rational decision. We all might think that we're all purely rational creatures when we make choices around purchases or which brands we support. But whether we fly Qantas or Virgin, for example, often is a more emotional decision than a rational one. So those all-important moments of truth are considering that every impression or every contact you have is an opportunity to influence. They make, so any of these impressions or contacts, can make up perceptions, and every experience is a moment of truth. Talking about Qantas and Virgin, I was flying back from Melbourne the other night. I've always flown Qantas. My husband tends to fly Virgin, which creates a few problems when we need to travel and we decide whose frequent flyers or velocity points we are going to use. For all the reasons we talked about, I just find that my loyalty tends to fall with Qantas. But when I was flying back the other night, lady came up to me, the chief flight attendant, and she said, "I just wanted to wish you happy birthday for tomorrow." It was my birthday the next day. And I said, "Really? Wasn't a significant birthday by any stretch?" And I said, "Wow, that's really wonderful." She said, "Can I get you a glass of wine?" I said, "Well, no, I've just been in Melbourne wining and dining for 4 days. I'm good, but thank you very much." And I'm assuming they have, gone through the data of who's on the plane and identified that it was my birthday. Anyway, she went away. About half an hour later, she came back with a big bag of lint balls. So Qantas has gone back to handing the little chocolates out on the flights, and said, "Look, you didn't take a glass of wine, but will you please take all the leftover chocolates home?" To which I gleefully agreed. And my husband was watching a movie and he took off his headphones and he said, "Yeah, you're not getting that on Virgin." So for me, that was a moment of truth that Qantas lived up to their promise of premium and loyalty and made me feel special. So they have worked, obviously they are being very intentional around that. And it left an impression, which I'm now sharing with you. So that is a really great example of a moment of truth. So in your organisation, again, no matter how big or small you might be, think about your moments of truth and interactions you have to influence others' perceptions. How you look, what you say, and how you say it are all important. I'm speaking to you today, and there was a lot of content, but how I'm saying it and my body language are conveying as much as what I'm actually saying, if not more. In fact, when we are communicating, so whether we're presenting or perhaps you might be doing a media interview, your tone of voice and your body language contribute to the perceptions that others have of you. And I know a lot of you will already recognise this. When you go into a room and how someone greets you, whether they're looking you in the eye, their manners, whether their voice is, flat or whether there's some inflection there, all of that will help make an impression. And in fact, they say you can make an impression of someone, you will have an impression of someone within that first 7 seconds of meeting them. Now, they might shift that impression over time, but we are very quick to judge, and we will use all of those 3 pieces to form that impression. So as I said, some of those moments of truth can be really, really simple. When you enter a room, greet people. When you go and speak to each other in your networking this evening. How you lead and behave in a meeting. Those of you who are leaders within your organisations or have teams, they are taking cues from you, and you are shaping perceptions with all of those interactions. Handling phone calls, you don't have to necessarily see someone to hear the tone of their voice. And all of those other interactions there are quite important. So think about, as I said, what are your moments of truth? Where do you interact, both internally and externally, with customers and stakeholders? Why is it not working? And one of the other most important or potent tools you have in your toolkit is emotional intelligence, or EQ. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's quite innate, and that some of us might have more EQ naturally than others, but these are actually learned behaviours as well. You do not have to be an extrovert to have high EQ. There are 5 traits that have been identified, and in fact, Oracle recruits their graduates based on these 5 traits. So your technical skills on your CV will get you so far, but once you are in the interview, these are the 5 traits against which they're assessing their graduates. So self-awareness, understanding your strengths, but also your flaws. When I'm in a group of people, I tend to speak quite quickly, and I will speak over the top of them. Just ask my husband. So I need to be really cognizant when I am in meetings that I leave room for others to speak, and I don't try and finish other people's sentences. That's that self-awareness. Self-regulating, again, is the steps that I take to minimise that. So you can be self-aware and don't care and just go on bombastically and be yourself, or you can look and sharpen and hone and try and self-regulate some of your behaviours and be intentional around those. Motivation, I think, is an interesting one. So EQ, those who are high in EQ, tend to be quite self-motivated and willing to step out of comfort zones. And I'm sure that many of the people who are in the startup phase of, if you're in that phase of your business, will be feeling that right now. You are probably well out of your comfort zone, but even though it might feel hard, even though it might be difficult, you are motivated to keep going. So think about that, as an aspect of EQ. Empathy, standing in other people's shoes and genuinely listening and hearing what they have to say. So empathy is a huge sign of EQ. And importantly, just social skills. So, manners, please, thank you. Recognising when somebody else might not be on the same wavelength as you. So being conscious and intentional around those 5 attributes can be a really powerful way to make an emotional connection. And when you do make that emotional connection, that's where the magic happens. That's where the relationships are built and where you're able to continue to influence those perceptions and communicate and build on those relationships. And I think it is a very rare commodity today amongst people who make a very positive impression. Can anyone think of people who might be quite well known who appear to have presence? You're nodding? Yeah? Who? Bill Gates, yeah. Who else? Lady in the blue next to you. You were nodding? Yeah. Yeah. So it was just about someone that has that X factor in a room. It may not be the best looking, it may not be the smartest person in the room. It is about being aware and having presence. And the 5 key attributes of having presence are appearing to have time. I think Barack Obama is someone who has presence, who has been incredibly intentional about how he has shaped his personal brand. But they appear to have time, no matter how busy they are, no matter how important they are, no matter how famous they might be. You will all have people that you've worked with over the years, and they might not be your CEO, they could be somebody else within your business. It could be the person that answers the phone or is at the front desk, but they appear to have time for you, no matter who you are or what they're doing. They're exceptional listeners. They're not just nodding along, they are really hearing what you have to say and participating fully in that conversation. They treat people individually, so they will seek to learn something about you and appear to be comfortable in their own skin. There's that natural appeal, that X factor, as you spoke about, and there's a calmness and control. There's something about stillness as well when you're interacting with others. I am a big talker with my hands, so again, another self-regulation that I have to apply is keeping my hands in a place where they're not going to be flapping around and distracting people or making me appear a little bit flighty and perhaps a little bit, stressed or anxious. So again, focusing on some of those attributes. We're not asking you to force yourself to be someone you're not. It's simply thinking about, where can I influence perceptions? How can I make an impression? How do I make that connection? And these are just some really simple tips and tools to help you do that. So lastly, it's important to be yourself. Even though we talk about being intentional, you need to be genuine. You know in yourself when you're, it's one thing to step out of your comfort zone, it's something else again to be someone you're not. So in all of your interactions, think about the different versions of you that you might need to bring. The version of me you see up here today, it's still me, but it's slightly, honed to the context that we're in today. The version of me that will go home is different again. You'll be different in meetings. You'll be different if you're doing pitches. You might be different if you're dealing with the government. So think about how you be intentional, but also be yourself. You have to be true to yourself, and you've got to be true, most importantly, to your values. And that's when the magic happens. That's when you make the connection. That's when you start to communicate with influence. So just those last takeaways in terms of how we share our story, how we communicate. So value every moment of truth and all of those interactions. Never think a stakeholder is not important, because you do not know who that person knows. And I think we can all agree that in this sports tech sector within Queensland and Brisbane in particular, everyone knows somebody. So always treat all stakeholders with importance. Think of those moments of truth as an opportunity to influence. Think about being intentional. Tone of voice and body language, keep those in mind. Practice with other people before you have to make a presentation or a pitch. Make that connection through EQ and presence. Think about how you might hone some of those attributes, and even if they have to become learned behaviours, invest that time and effort, because it will pay off. And lastly, be true to yourself and your values. We're not asking you to be someone you're not. So that is a very, very speed date session of Communicate with Influence. But I hope no matter where you are in your journey, you've at least have a few extra tips, tools, techniques to put in your toolbox, take back to your offices and your teams, and think about how you can be more intentional with how you communicate. Thanks. So, how are we going time-wise? I think I've clawed back a little bit of the time there. We spoke about key messages and how we be intentional about developing those and defining that story. And I think one of the most exciting aspects of today is the opportunity that you're all about to have to break into groups and workshop the messaging and the narrative and what we want this very exciting emerging sports tech sector to be known for. Because at the end of the day, it's all of you. It's not me, it's not Nicole, it's all of you. And so we need a story that reflects the rich diversity that you all bring to the table, and also that you can hear your own voices replayed when you talk about this sector, because you are going to be its greatest ambassadors. Those of you who are working within it, reaping the rewards, encouraging others, identifying that next generation of talent, that is all of you. So we want to hear from you today. What is important to you in this story? How do you want it to be shaped? What are the words that are going to be important? And then we're going to ask you for some words. So if you look to the future and you picture a successful Queensland sports tech sector, so let's jump ahead to that desired future place. It's all happening. Everyone's humming and excited and talking about what is going on in Queensland. What is that that's happening up there? Which three words would best describe it?